Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboy Story Time, we ride the stories of the West Campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The rope bit deep into Maya Redbird's wrists as the cliff pushed heat through her bones. The rock tasted of iron and dust. Wind slid along the vermilion rim and lifted her hair into her eyes. She blinked grit away and found a root with 3 fingers. The root tore a little. Her belly brushed stone tight and round the child, shifting like a fish beneath the skin. Hold, she told herself low enough that it was only breath. Her feet searched toes, scraping for ledge. A boot scuffed above. Laughter fell over the edge and bounced back hard. Eagle with clipped wings, a man called. See if it still flies. A heel stamped down on her knuckles. Pain flashed white along her hand. She did not scream. She pulled the fingers free just before bone cracked and slid against the face of the cliff until her knee found a crook in the sandstone. The wind smelled like hot rope. The child turned again. She pressed her mouth to the rock to steady the world and climbed 1 slow inch, then another. Hands grabbed the rope at last and dragged her up by the wrists. Sun hit her eyes. Boots. Spurs. A shadow moved, and she braced, expecting the kick that would send her back into the red air. It did not come. Rough hands simply cinched new knots and hauled her to a wagon. By afternoon, she was standing on a plank in Silver Mesa's market, ankles shackled to a post. The sun sat like brass on her scalp. Flies worried the corner of her eye. The smells were sour beer horse, cured hides, tobacco spit drying before it hit the boards. Buyers gathered in a crescent. Some chewed, some grinned. Some did not look at her at all, only at her belly. Evelyn Greyhawk stood beside her with a paper in hand, chin-high gray streaks tight in a braid. Labor, Evelyn said in a flat voice, and soon another mouth that might fetch coin. Who bids? A rancher in a dust-stiff coat raised his chin. Stable work, $4 a month in credit. A man with gold tooth laughed. 2 for 1, she can birth the help. Maya dropped her gaze to the plank, not in shame, to breathe. The crowd's noise dimmed for a heartbeat when a tall man stepped from the shade of the blacksmith's overhang. He wore a flat-crowned hat and a long coat, the color of old river mud. Sun caught his eyes. They were the clean blue of winter water. He set a stack of bills on the table. 200. The noise stopped. Caleb Warren, the auctioneer, said, careful like the name was a spur. You buying stock now? I am buying back a life, Caleb said. Laughter snapped and broke again in the heat. Waste your money, Warren. Wild ones do not keep. Caleb did not answer. He crouched, found the lock at Maya's ankle, and turned a key that looked too small to matter. The chain fell. He slipped his coat from his shoulders and set it around hers. It smelled like sweat leather and cold air. She stood very still. He kept his hands where she could see them. Evelyn's eyes flicked over the crowd, then to Caleb's money, then to Maya. For a breath, her mouth softened at the edges. When she looked at Maya again, it was gone. The ride out of town tossed heat off the road. The wagon wheels spoke in a thin whine. Joshua trees crawled by in strange poses. A hawk hung in the sky like an iron nail. Caleb held the reins and kept his voice quiet. Water in the jug to your right. Take small sips. It will sit better. She did not answer. Her hands worked at the coat collar, feeling the worn nap. She listened to the leather creak, and the horse breathed not to him. They reached Haven Hollow before the sun tipped. The land opened like a shallow bowl rimmed in red stone and cottonwoods. A house stood in the center with a porch that faced the wind. A barn and pen sat close by. Bottles hung from the branches of the largest cottonwood, each with a thin neck string, each catching a sliver of light. They made a faint music in the breeze. Under that tree, a small marker leaned with a woman's name carved in it. Someone had tucked a handful of wild asters along the base. Maya looked once and then looked away. Caleb helped her down with a single touch against her elbow. Food, first he said, then a bed. Inside the house smelled like soap wood ash and a stew long off the boil. He led her to a room with white curtains and a quilt that showed blue triangles pointing north. On the dresser sat a pitcher and basin, a folded calico dress, a comb missing 1 tooth. A window let in morning light even though it was late day. It had been set up so long that dust had flattened in a neat square beneath the comb. You can lock the door from inside, Caleb said, and then caught himself. His mouth pressed thin. There is no lock. I do not keep cages. You can wedge the chair if you need it. Maya watched his face. He looked like a man who had practiced not asking questions. He set a tray on the bedside table. Bread heel and honey. Sliced venison. coffee that steamed a little, a red apple. Her throat pulled tight at the sight of the apple. He noticed and placed it nearest. "If you need anything, call," he said. "If you do not want to call, do not. I will hear if you fall." He stepped back over the threshold and left the door open behind him. After 3 heartbeats, he reached in and shut it very slowly. Maya stood without moving. When the house settled, she crossed the room and pressed her ear to the panel. Voices drifted from the porch, a deeper one that might have been the traitor Micah Boone, Caleb's lower reply. 20 years, Micah said. A man could build a town in that time. A man can also tear one down, Caleb said. I have not balanced it yet. Maya lifted the chair and set it under the doorknob. She slid the dresser a little enough to pinch the rug. She opened the bottom drawer to see what people hide when they think they are alone. There was a shirt folded with care, a tin of salve, a small badge from the 3rd Cavalry with a hairline crack, and beneath the shirt a coin on a leather thong. The coin had been cut in half. The stamped sun reached to the ragged edge. She touched it and flinched as if it had heat. A murmur of pain ran across her belly and then eased. She sat on the bed and felt the quilt's seams under her palms. The quilt was heavy and cool. She left the apple for last and tested the bread with the tip of her tongue, then took a real bite. It tasted like wheat and smoke and something sweet she could not name. After dark, the house grew smaller. The bottles in the cottonwood sang a little in the wind. The walls ticked as they cooled. She slept sitting up, the coat still on her shoulders. A tin knife from the tray slipped under the pillow where her hand could find it in a blink. Sometime in the night, she woke to a shape in the doorway. She did not start. It was the house itself, crooked with shadow. From downstairs, a floorboard spoke. Voices again on the porch. "Tom," Micah said, "you saved more than most men ever will." A long silence. Caleb's reply was faint and tired. The number never reaches even. The chair under the doorknob held. She let her eyes close, then opened them when something slid out of the coat pocket and tapped the floor once. A photograph face down. She picked it up. It showed a woman with hair in 2 braids and a baby pressed against her chest. The woman's face tilted toward the light. The baby's hand dug into the fabric of her dress. The corners of the paper had gone soft from being handled. Maya traced the woman's cheek with her thumb. There was a shape to the nose, a lift to the mouth, a thread of resemblance that tugged at a place beneath her ribs. She tucked the photo back into the coat and sat with both arms around her belly. The bottles outside sang again. A coyote called from the rim and another answered. She shut her eyes and saw the coin half a sun bright against a worn shirt. Morning came bright and thin. The desert smelled like creosote and wet dust. Calves bawled somewhere out of sight. Caleb's boots crossed the yard with a steady rhythm. Maya watched the curtain breathe in and out with the draft. The child turned inside her, a slow roll under her palm. She rose and washed in the basin. The water went gray. When she crossed to the coat to hang it over the chair, the photograph fell again. This time the corner bent and caught light just right, so the woman's eyes seemed to look straight through the paper. Maya held the picture in both hands. She did not know the woman's name. She knew the mouth. She had seen that mouth in a mirror when she was younger. She put the photo back in the pocket and buttoned it closed. Her fingers found the coat's inside seam and felt a small stitch that was not like the others, a hiding place. She let it be. Outside, the bottles on the cottonwood chimed once more and went still. She set her hand flat on her belly and listened to her own breath and the slow waking of the yard. Her other hand slid under the pillow to touch the knife and count it real. Something inside her chest tightened and then unlocked. She was not safe. She had a room and a door that did not lock. She had a photograph that would not stop looking back. Downstairs, a board creaked. A man cleared his throat. The smell of coffee climbed the stair. In the corner near the dresser, a thread of morning sun found the glint of metal where the cut coin lay in the drawer. It threw a small blade of light against the wall. Maya watched that thin shine until it faded with the shifting sun. She thought of the woman in the photograph, the curve of her braids, the set of her shoulders. She had never been here, and she was everywhere in the room. The bottles outside did not sing now. The air had gone still. She set the coat back on the chair and let her hand rest for an extra second on the pocket. The weight of the photo pressed through the cloth. She breathed. Then she opened the door. Maya eased the door wide and stepped into the cool of the hall. Coffee moved up the stairs in a slow curl. On the porch, the cottonwood bottles chimed once and settled. Caleb waited by the stove with 2 cups and a plate of cornbread. He looked at her like a man who was not sure if the room would let him speak. "Morning," he said. "There is honey if you want it." She took the cup, watched the steam braid in the light, and stayed near the door. He nodded toward her hands. Is the pain bad? I can stand, she said. I did not ask what you can stand, he said. Is it bad? She set the cup down. It comes and goes. Then it is pain, he said, quiet almost to himself. If you need to sit, you sit. In the corral, a bay mare drove her head against the rail and tossed foam on the boards. The animal's flank trembled. 2 men had left her tied hard and tight. Maya crossed the yard without asking. Caleb followed at a distance. Her name is Juniper, he said. She came here wild. Her name is what she answers to, Maya said. She stepped into the pen with her palms open to the light, let the mare smell her wrists, then touched the hollow between ear and eye where the skin runs thin. She spoke in her mother's words, no more than a breath. The ears came forward, then relaxed. The white rolled back from the eye. Maya set the halter against the jaw and waited until the mare lowered her head into it on her own. When the buckle clicked, the animal let out a long sound that was almost a sigh. Caleb watched the way a man watches a fire he thought would jump the fence. You did not break her, he said. She was already broken, Maya said, and stroked the ridge where a rope had rubbed hair away. I told her no one here will throw a rope to take her wind. Clouds stacked to the north by noon, a blue wall that ate the horizon. Heat pressed the yard flat. Micah Boone rumbled in with a wagon full of feed and canvas. He traded talk about windmills and calves while his hands moved in small signs that only 3 people were meant to see. Maya noted the signs by the way his fingers twitched and the way Caleb's jaw answered with a small muscle at the hinge. The names meant nothing to Maya, but the pattern did. Drop points. Nights. Numbers. Storm by supper, Micah said loud enough for the wind to hear. He swiped his brow and climbed back to his seat. Tie what you want to keep. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a flat bruise. The first cool breath came like a hand over the face. Bottles on the cottonwood sang in a higher key. Caleb checked shutters, latched the barn, and set a lamp by the window. Maya felt the front pass over her skin, a ripple like a fish through shallow water. When the first rain hit the rail, someone pounded on the front door. Caleb opened to a woman with one eye darkened and the other full of fear. Her dress was wet and stuck to her shoulders. She held herself very straight, which was what you do when you do not want to fall. My name is Eleanor Price, she said, Judge Whitlock's wife. I was told to come here if I could not stay in that house any longer. She did not look at Maya. She looked past Caleb into the room that smelled like soap and stew. The wind blew rain into her hair and across the floorboards. Come, Caleb said. Sit by the stove. Eleanor's fingers shook when she reached for the towel. Her sleeve rode up. A neat ring of old scars marked her wrist. She pulled the fabric down with care. Who told you to come? Maya asked. A woman in town, Eleanor said. Older, gray braid. She said Haven Hollow helps those who cannot go to the law. Evelyn. The name stayed behind Maya's teeth. Thunder walked across the yard. The next flash filled the room with a sheet of white. Maya gripped the edge of the table. Pain climbed her spine and wrapped ribs and belly in a slow, grinding hold. Her hands went to the chair back and stayed there. When she let out air, it came as a sound. Caleb saw her face change. He moved the lamp to the table and set out a bowl and a length of clean linen without asking her anything. How far apart, he said. Long, Maya said, then it took her. Now they are close. He turned the kitchen like a field tent. He opened a leather roll and laid down clamps and thread and a boiled needle. Eleanor brought hot water in small steps and folded cloth until her hands learned the size of it. The storm battered the porch. The bottles sang themselves hoarse. Maya worked through each wave with her jaw tight and her eyes fixed on the small knot in the table where the grain dives. When she stood, her knees went soft. Caleb took her weight with a hand against her shoulder blade, nothing more. Sit when you need, Eleanor said. Breathe when you can. It went that way until Maya's breath stuck and the room narrowed to a thin line of light. Caleb checked and met Eleanor's eyes. Breach, he said. We will turn. Maya's hand found his wrist and held. Do it, she said. His palms were clean and warm. The next minutes held forever inside them. The storm tore at the roof, and in the kitchen, a small world balanced on the space between a breath and a cry. Caleb's jaw set hard, then loosened. Now, he said, push. The house filled with a new sound that cut through the thunder and made the hair rise on Maya's arms. Caleb lifted the boy and set him on Maya's chest. The child's skin was the deep color of fresh clay. His hands opened and closed like a swimmer's. He found a lock of her hair and gripped it. The world became as simple as that. Rio, Maya said, and she felt the name sit right in her mouth. Caleb smiled without showing teeth and wrapped the boy in a clean cloth. The rain ran out of strength after midnight. The wind went from a fist to a hand over the grass. Eleanor fell asleep in the chair with her head back and her hand on her own throat, like she was feeling a pulse. Caleb carried a blanket to her and put it there very soft. He stood by the window with his hand against the sill and his eyes on the cottonwood until the bottle music fell to a single note. When morning came, the world smelled like wet dust and creosote. Maya slept and woke and slept again. Rio breathed with his own rhythm against her chest. Caleb set a cup by the bed and left. The house sighed. Somewhere outside, a calf bawled and then settled. By mid-morning, hunger pulled her to her feet. She drank and ate and swayed a little as she crossed the room. When she stepped onto the back porch, the air hit her face like a new skin. She walked behind the smokehouse where the ground stayed dry under the eaves. A board under her soul shifted with a hollow note. She stopped and pressed her weight down. The sound came again. She crouched and found a nail head that had been bent back and set again so neatly it was almost kind. She pried the board up with the bone handle of the kitchen knife. A square mouth opened on cool, close air. The ladder took her into a room no one else was meant to see. The light came in thin through vent cracks and lay across rows of bedrolls, a barrel of clean water, a line of jars marked with chalk, a pile of children's shirts. On the wall hung a map drawn by a careful hand. It showed arroyos, canyons, and the faint lines of game trails. Along the routes, someone had marked small suns, each cut in half. Maya stared until the shape of it pressed into her. She was not surprised. She was only done with pretending not to see. Ash Road, Caleb said behind her. She did not jump. He had moved quiet and stopped where the ladder joined the floor. Families, he said. We hide them for a night or three, then they move to the next point. Why the half-suns, she asked. His hand went to his chest before he caught it. The person who taught me uses that mark. Who? A healer, he said. She found me under a mesquite tree and kept my breath in my body. She cut a coin and made me keep half, said I would know when to carry it. You were cavalry, Maya set her eyes on the cracked badge in her memory. Yes, he said. There was no fight in the word. I did what they taught me to do. Then someone taught me something else. She filed the taste of that for later. Above their heads, the bottles on the cottonwood cut a high, thin line. Wind had risen again. Eleanor stood in the doorway at the top of the ladder. Her face was clean now, and her hair tied back with a fresh strip of cloth. The black around her eye had gone green. That was some weather, she said. Is there work I can do? The stew pot likes company, Caleb said. Eleanor smiled a little and vanished. Maya climbed up slow and replaced the board until it settled into itself. When she stepped into the yard, the light had gone brittle. A rider crossed the far ridge and stopped where the chaparral breaks like teeth. The figure sat a horse like a man who believed the earth belonged to him. Sun found his hair and set it pale. The distance was long, but Maya knew the cut of his shoulders. She turned and let the door close between them. In town, flyers began to show on posts and water troughs. Eleanor brought one back in her skirt pocket and set it on the table under a glass. Judge Whitlock offered coin for information about his wife and the woman who had stolen her. He called the thief a kidnapper and set out a number that would make boys see only silver. Eleanor read the print twice and folded the paper with a neat crease. Her mouth was a straight line. By dusk, the light went red on the rim. Micah's wagon did not appear. The bottles never settled into a song. Horses tossed their heads without a reason Maya could see. She felt the shift in the air like a door opening in a room where you sit with your back to it. Hoofbeats came to the gate and stopped. Evelyn Greyhawk sat straight as a rail on the wagon bench, one hand on the brake. They are talking in town, she said. Captain Beaumont is drinking with the judge. Caleb's eyes went to the ridgeline and back. He did not ask questions he already knew. Evelyn looked at Maya, then at the house behind her, then at the sky that held no stars yet. Tie what you want to keep, she said. Dawn. Caleb left and returned with a paper folded twice and worn at the edges. He put it in Maya's hand and did not release it until she looked at him. The paper showed a canyon that pinched to nothing and a pool of blue ink in the shape of a basin. Half of the drawing was missing. The cut ran clean as a new scar. The leather thong of the coin touched her wrist as he stepped back. The bottles on the cottonwood lifted one clear note and let it hang. Before sunrise, the yard was a bowl of thin gray. Caleb saddled the team and packed what a person can carry without rattling. He moved through the house the way a man moves through a church. He left drawers half open and papers spread, then gathered what mattered and fed a match to the rest out in a wash tub so the smoke would not show above the cottonwood. He came back with a canvas roll and the half map folded to the soft spot. You take Rio and go with Evelyn, he said. I will come when the ash is cold. Maya looked at the coat on the chair at the pocket where the photograph slept, then at his hands. You cannot stay here and wait for them. I am not waiting, he said. I am clearing a trail. There was no more arguing that could change it. Evelyn clucked to the horses and set the wagon in motion. The wheels hummed on the hardpan. The bottles did not sing. Rio slept against Maya's chest with a mouth like a small heart. The road out of Haven Hollow ran north under the rim and narrowed until the brush leaned in. Sun found the edges of the clouds and set them on fire. 2 riders fell in behind them just inside the place where you do not want to turn your head and prove what you already know. Evelyn did not look back. She flicked the reins and kept them away from ruts that remembered other wagons. The trail broke from the wash at a canted angle and led to a bridge made of planks that had learned to flex. The span framed a slice of air that fell away to rock the color of old blood. Beyond the path climbed in switchbacks toward a wall that showed no doorway. "We cross on foot," Evelyn said. "Lighten the wagon." They took the water and what fit in arms. Maya set one palm to her belly and the other to the boy's back and stepped onto the boards. The bridge talked underfoot in small sounds. The riders behind them moved into sight. One wore blue that had started as army. The other had a scarf over his mouth where a tooth would flash. On the far side, a young father from the camps waited in the shadow of a piñon. He had a face the weather had learned and a scar that took his left eyebrow and gave him a permanent question. Lena had people everywhere. He reached for the water and took it like a man who had not been offered anything in a while. "Go," Evelyn said, and turned the wagon crossways to make a wall. She climbed to the seat with a revolver that had belonged to a younger woman. "I am noisy enough to count as 2. Maya hesitated. Evelyn raised her chin and shouted something that sounded like laughter but was not. A shot answered that sound, then another. Wood split near her shoulder. The riders checked and moved behind rock, then came again. Maya kept moving. The father went ahead of her with the bundle of shirts. The bridge sang once more and then stopped singing as their feet touched ground. The last bend hid them from the rifles. Water spoke somewhere close. The smell of limestone rose out of a cool place. The father pressed a hand to a seam in the rock, and another hand to a second seam lower down and pushed. Stones swung light as a door set true. Cold air met their faces and took the heat out of them. Blue Basin opened as a bowl hidden inside the mountain. A fall of water laid a white veil over one wall. Gardens ran in squares that followed a logic older than fence lines. People looked up from work and then came forward with their hands out. At the edge of the clearing stood a woman with silver in her braids and eyes that took everything in. Aunt Lena, Maya said, and the name held 20 years at once. Lena Snow pulled her close and did not squeeze where the boy lay between them. She smelled like sage and wood smoke and something sharp from a mortar. She stepped back and touched Rio's cheek with the back of her finger. "You brought a river here," she said. "Good." Maya saw the half coin at Lena's throat and reached for it without thinking. Caleb's coin had the same sun cut in the same place. Lena slipped hers free. Maya set Caleb's on top. The 2 halves found their edges and sat without a seam that you could feel with your thumb. Lena watched Maya's face rather than the metal. "He was dust and fever under a mesquite," Lena said. "A long time ago. I made him promise to carry people where law forgot to look." "You sent him to find me," Maya said. "I asked him," Lena said. He did not take long to say yes. Maya was still holding the joined coin. She separated the halves and put one back in Lena's hand. The room that was not a room held them both quiet for a count of 4. The father who had let them in spoke to Lena in words Maya had not used since she was small. He pointed back toward the ravine. Lena nodded and sent 2 boys with bows to the hidden seam. Evelyn came through the door on her own feet with hair out of its braid and a scrape along her forearm that would purple by night. She handed Lena the revolver without being asked and laughed once under her breath like she had just remembered the sound. "I kept my noise," she said. "You always do," Lena said. They wrapped Evelyn's arm and set her on a stool. She sat up straight and examined Blue Basin with a reporter's eyes without the paper. Maya watched the small measurements. She did not miss the way Evelyn looked at the map tacked to a beam that showed trails like veins, half-suns marking places a person could place a foot and not drop through. They fed everyone. The fall made a constant sound that filled the silences when fear would have built something of its own. Late afternoon, a runner arrived from the lower trail with a message rolled tight and sealed in a twist of grass. It was not a letter from a post. It was from Micah. Lena read it once and put it on the table. Her face set like the sky when weather turns not sudden, not gentle. "Judge Whitlock has a paper with a seal," she said. "Captain Beaumont fills the blanks with whatever names he needs. They plan to search every place where a man might hide a conscience and call it law." Caleb, Maya said. "He is smart," Lena said. "He knows how to erase himself." He is one man, Maya said. They are not. Lena's eyes met hers. They were steady and tired and kind. You have just done a hard thing and another is already knocking. If you go, the child stays with me. Maya looked down at Rio. He was asleep with one hand splayed, the fingers open like a star. The skin at his temple showed her heartbeat and his. She pressed her mouth to his hair and did not let herself stop moving after that. She gave him to Lena and felt something in her ribs pull like a stitch in a shirt. She straightened and picked up the knife from her boot. Evelyn stood. I am coming, she said. You just took a bullet past your skin, Lena said. It missed the parts I need, Evelyn said. She tied her braid again and set her jaw in a line that Maya recognized as the shape of decision. They left through the door in the rock and walked with the sun low and mean in their eyes. The slope took their breath and gave it back in small pieces. The air smelled like dust warmed for the second time. They reached the place where the trail opens to a view of Haven Hollow. The house sat in the middle like always. Nothing moved. The bottles did not shine. Maya's mouth dried. Evelyn touched her arm and then took her hand away so that the touch could sit on its own without meaning more than it did. The first guard watched from the barn shadow. He was too young for his boots. Evelyn picked up a stone and threw it into the corral. The sound rang off the trough. The boy swung that direction and saw nothing, and then saw Evelyn too late. She stepped behind him and set him against the wall for sleep with a quick blow to the place at the base of the skull. They tied him with his own belt and moved like ghosts toward the back porch. The kitchen window held a memory of last night's lamp smoke. The back door opened under Maya's hand without complaint. The house smelled like coffee gone to bitter. The ash of the burned papers left a grain that lived in her nose. They crossed the kitchen, then the hall, and climbed the stairs, avoiding the boards that tell on you. The room where Rio had been born was not the same room now. The bed held Caleb. Blood had dried in a shape across his shirt that looked like a map without names. One eye was shut by swelling. The other found her and went wide, not with relief, but with warning. Ronnie said. The word broke and still got out. Maya felt the air shift behind her. A shape moved. Something hard struck her head. The floor tilted and reached up. She saw the ceiling as a patchwork of shadow where a lamplight had once made a circle, and then the shape of a man in uniform swam into view. Lucien Beaumont had the look of a winter river. He bent until she could smell whatever he had chosen to drink. Where is the child, he said. You can save your pet if you answer. Maya looked at Caleb. He shook his head very slightly and shut his good eye like the light was too much. Safe, she said, and tasted blood. Not for you. He smiled without warmth and stood back. Men came in and set rope to work and made knots like they wanted to prove they knew how. They took her and Caleb down the stairs and into the yard. The bottles on the cottonwood were silent. Evelyn stood with her wrists bound, her eyes searching for something to hold. She found Maya's face and set her own in a way that said not to speak. They drove them to Silver Mesa. The street pulled people the way a fire pulls moths. Inside the courthouse, Judge Whitlock sat high and heavy in his robe. His mouth looked like a cut made by someone who did not want to practice. Beaumont stood to the side and wore his uniform like armor. Eleanor Price sat beside Whitlock and did not belong in silk. Her hair was scraped into a coil so tight that it shone. The court will hear charges, Whitlock said. His voice filled the room because the room had been built to obey voices like his. He listed words like treason and sedition and kidnapping. He said harboring. He said aiding. He said the law as if it were a wall made of something you cannot climb. Caleb stood between two soldiers and held himself like a fence post. If feeding children is treason, then I am a traitor, he said. The room moved. The gavel broke the movement. Whitlock looked out over heads and saw only what matched his eyes. Beaumont gestured toward Maya. The woman is a proven associate of hostels and the abductor of a magistrate's wife. Eleanor did not flinch. She kept her eyes on Whitlock. She leaned close and said something no one else could hear. He frowned. His hands tapped the bench, then went still. This court will reconvene at 9 in the morning, he said. The prisoners will be held below. They took them to the cells under the floor where the air sat and listened. The guard at the desk looked like a boy trying on a man's job. Caleb sank onto a bench and put his head in his hands for the space of one breath, then lifted it again like he had not done that. Evelyn sat on the floor with her back to the wall and stared at her wrists as if they were someone else's. Maya went to the bars and let her fingers curl around iron that had forgotten being ore. She watched the door where the light made a narrow path on the floor. Night filled the cracks of the building until everything sounded like the slow drip of time. Much later, a key turned in the outer lock with a sound that woke everyone without a word. The guard's head bent over his cup. A figure slipped inside like a shadow that had found a body. Eleanor Price moved to the desk and poured a few drops from a small vial into the coffee and turned the cup so the handle pointed a new way. She came to the cells with a ring of keys and a face that did not hold any expression a judge could read. She fit a key to the lock and opened it as if the door had been meant to swing all along. When she looked up at Maya, she did not smile. She gave one small nod, then moved to the next lock. Keys bit into the locks like teeth. Metal gave a soft protest and then swung. Eleanor handed Evelyn a coil of rope cut short for wrists that no longer needed it. She moved as if every step had been measured the day before. The guard snored once and folded farther into his chair. Micah Boone waited in the alley with a mule team and a wagon that looked like it carried nothing but sacks of grain and a broken plow. He lifted the rear canvas and showed a hollow shaped for bodies and a quilt that had been washed thin. And he whispered, quiet lungs, heavy hearts later. They slid Caleb down first. His breath ran hot and shallow. He caught Maya's sleeve with his good hand and held for the length of a blink. Eleanor helped Evelyn climb and then reached for the canvas. "You are coming," Maya said. Eleanor shook her head. "He has a safe. I know where the paper sleeps. Someone needs to hand it to a man who can read law without swallowing it." Micah clicked his tongue and let the mules lean into their collars. The wagon rolled with the heavy grace of something built to pretend it was not important. Street dogs did not look up. The eastern sky had a seam of gray where morning hides and thinks. They took the back road out along the wash and cut across a stand of mesquite. Micah never glanced toward the main trail. He guided with his breath and the loose line in one hand. He hummed something that sounded like a hymn no church would claim. In the wagon belly, the air smelled like burlap and soap. Caleb's skin burned through the quilt. Maya touched his jaw and felt him drift and come back. At dawn they reached a clearing where 3 riders waited with horses that could string a travois. They were Lena's people by the way they scanned without moving their heads. One of them set a hand to Caleb's shoulder, with a kind of apology. "He will hate this," the man said, and slipped the poles under the quilt. "He will love it if it brings him breath," Maya said. They left the wagon and took the western pass. The animal's hooves found purchase where there should not have been any. Sun climbed and pressed heat into the stone until everything smelled like hot dust and creosote. At the notch where the trail narrows, a hawk turned and hung on the air. Maya felt the feathered edge of that circle on the back of her neck. Blue Basin took them with a rush of cool. The fall scattered light over Lena's doorway. She stood with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and a basin ready. Her eyes went to Caleb's face and then to the man bringing him. Orders came from her mouth and hands at the same time. Fire, water, knife, thread, willow tincture, honey. The lodge filled with steam that smelled like yarrow and damp wool. Evelyn stood at the door with her scraped arm bandaged and her jaw set. She took Rio and swayed without thinking feet, finding a mother's measure that had not been hers until now. Maya did not sit. She held cloth when Lena said hold. She kept the bowl warm when Lena said keep. She counted the rises and falls that made a life measure. By noon, the fever climbed another rung. Caleb spoke in a voice the room did not know. Names that did not belong to the present scattered like nails on a floor. He said sorry, and he said again, and then the words folded upon themselves and became breath. A runner came, then not winded because he knew how to move without spending. He ducked at the door and handed Lena a slip of paper rolled tight and tied with twine. She read it and put the paper on the shelf where everyone could see it if they looked for it. "Marshal Sutter has my copies," Eleanor said from the threshold. Her hair was wet from the fall and her cheeks were raw. "He sent a man to say he is coming." But Beaumont took 8 who answered to him and only him. "How long?" Maya asked. "Less than an hour," the runner said. They had horses ready. Lena looked at Maya and at the boy asleep against Evelyn's shoulder. She went to a trunk and drew out a canvas case with a rifle oiled and wrapped against dust. She pressed it into Maya's hands. "You know how to listen with your cheek on wood," Lena said. Maya nodded. "He is not in a place I can help now." "Not with your hands," Lena said. "With your feet and your eye, yes." They laid planks across big stones to make breastworks where the rock pinches. Hands younger than Maya's set out cartridges on a blanket and kept count. Micah hammered wedges into seams to steady a brace. He swore once at a nail that bent and then apologized under his breath like the wood had taken offense. The entrance seam hid under the fall. Spray stitched cold into Maya's hair. She watched through a firing slit where water runs thin. The first sign was dust on the slope where there should have been shadow. Then came the quiet that rides before men who know how to kill without talking about it. Beaumont reached the shelf below and spread his men with a flick. They carried canvas sacks with a carefulness that announced powder. One set his palm on the rock, felt the tremble of water, and smiled with half his mouth. Beaumont took his hat off and wiped his brow, and put the hat back on like he was posing for a portrait that would name a victory. Maya steadied the rifle on the rest, the wood set against her cheek like an old friend. Through iron sights, she held his chest, then his throat, then slid to the ground at his boot and fired. Stones spat dust and threw chips at his shin. He spun and looked up into the fall as if the mountain had spoken his name. "Drop the sacks," Maya called. "Back away slow." Beaumont laughed with his teeth together. "Bring me the traitor and the woman," he said to his men, "or bring me their heads." He gestured, and two moved with fuses and a coil. The defenders answered with a volley that cracked the air and walked them back to the lee of a boulder. A man kissed the rock and cursed and grinned. The world held in a pause long enough to feel the choice. "Keep him busy," Maya said. "I'm taking the outside." Evelyn grabbed her sleeve once and let go. The touch gave everything it needed without a word. Maya moved into the side passage that Lena had carved with patience and a map in her head. It dumped her into brush 100 yards below and behind the men at the powder. She crawled until sage scraped her belly and ants found her wrist. She swallowed dust and held it there so it would not cough out. She rose to a knee and leveled the rifle at the hinge of Beaumont's arm. The first shot would end everything if she wanted it to. She let the breath go and saw a different course. She put the sight on the fuse man's wrist and took the shot when her heart beat low. The man screamed and threw the fuse into water that took it and turned it into a snake of smoke and nothing. Another reached for the powder and found his hand empty because Micah had split the charge with a shot of his own. The sacks spilled into the spray and turned to paste. Beaumont found her then. His eyes were bright the way a fox's eyes shine before dawn. He lifted his pistol and put the muzzle on a line with her face. Maya's world shrank to the circle of black and the glint at the front sight. Eleanor moved in from her left and struck his wrist with a rock big enough to matter. The shot went wild and rang on stone. Beaumont backhanded her with the pistol, and she went to a knee and came back up with a breath that sounded stolen. He turned the barrel toward her chest. Maya fired and hit his sleeve in meat. He did not drop. He grinned a small grin at her like he admired the way she missed his heart. The next gunshot was his. The sound slid through Maya's teeth and down into the place that makes your legs answer. For a second there was no sound at all. Eleanor looked down at the red spreading across her dress like a flower too bright for the desert. She swayed once. Maya caught her before her head met rock. Eleanor's breath came fast and on top of itself. She tried to press her hand to the wound, and her hand fell back in surprise like it belonged to someone else. "Hold," Maya said. "Hold on." Eleanor smiled a small irritated smile as if the inconvenience of dying offended her. "Tell it right," she whispered. "Use names." Her eyes found a point past Maya's shoulder and stayed there. Her hand rose to Maya's cheek and left a smear the size of a coin. It cooled fast. Her shoulders slackened. The air left her mouth and did not come back to chase it. A crack of rifles and a shout rose from below. Horses and men swept the shelf with a confidence that only papers can make. Marshal Sutter's badge gleamed once and then dulled with sweat. His men came up the trail in an arrowhead and flanked Beaumont's line. The fight collapsed fast and hard. Men in blue fell and slid. Beaumont stood and lifted his pistol toward Sutter and was taken in the throat by a shot that did not ask permission. He sat against a rock like a man trying to rest on a hot day and then tilted to one side and let go. Powder turned to paste under the fall. Lanyards lay dark and dead. One man sobbed in a way he did not mean to. Sutter sent a deputy to collect weapons and slapped cuffs on the men who still had hands to wear them. He looked at Maya with a question that could not be asked in front of those men. She did not answer. She touched Eleanor's hair back from her forehead and closed her eyes with 2 fingers. They took the bodies below so the fall would not make a wet sermon. Sutter walked to Lena and took the paper roll that would keep a marshalling of facts firm when tongues tried to blur them. He signed a line with a pencil that had no eraser. He looked 10 years older in the space between a breath and the next one. Maya crossed the basin and did not see the gardens or the faces that made a ring and opened and made a ring again. The lodge smelled like willow and sweat baked into wool. The air tasted like iron at the back of the throat. Caleb lay in the center on a pallet with his hair stuck to his face. Lena sat with her hands on his chest, counting with her fingers. "It is breaking," Lena said, "or it is breaking him." Maya took a cloth and a bowl and worked a rhythm across his face. She kept her voice low and steady and told him the names of things she could see. Wool, willow, water, her hand, his name, the boy, the bottles in the tree at home, the way the cottonwood sounded when wind walks it. His back arched. A tremor ran through him from heel to jaw. Lena shouted for another pair of hands and got them. They held his shoulders and his hips so he would not break himself on the floor. His teeth clicked. His eyes rolled white and then fixed on a place that was far and then came back to a place that was close. "Give me room," Lena said. She poured a measure of dark liquid between his lips while Maya held his head and wiped the spill. The medicine went in and he coughed and almost brought it back up and then swallowed it on a groan. His hands opened and shut. His legs kicked once and fell still. Outside, voices rose and fell. A baby cried, then quieted. Boots ran past and stopped. Sutter's men called out numbers and names. The fall did not change its sound no matter what bled or shouted. Caleb's breath stuttered. It caught. His face eased and then tightened again. Lena touched his neck and frowned and touched it again. She looked at Maya and then at the bowl and then at her own hands, as if there should have been more fingers there to do more work. The tremor came again harder. The pallet thumped once against the floor. The bowl slid and struck Maya's ankle and made a dull note. The air in the lodge went thin as a thread stretched to the point of breaking. Maya set her palm on his chest and felt for the rise. It was there, and then it was less, and then it was there again, small and stubborn. She bent so her forehead almost touched his and held still while the world decided. Night folded itself around Blue Basin and then lifted. The fever broke just before dawn. Caleb's skin cooled under Maya's palm the way rock cools after sun. Sweat came in a fine sheen, then beaded, then ran. His breath lost its ragged edge. He slept without fighting whatever dream had its hands on him. Lena leaned back on her heels and let out air she had been holding for hours. Maya stepped outside and washed her hands in the runout below the fall. The water took the willow and the night from her skin. She cupped a drink and tasted stone and leaf and a little metal from the tin dipper. When she turned, Marshal Sutter stood by the garden fence with his hat in his hands. Dust rimmed the badge on his vest. "My men have Beaumont and what is left of them," he said. "I found papers in Whitlock's safe that match the copies Miss Price sent. It is enough to hold him." He did not offer comfort. He did not ask for thanks. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat and walked back toward his riders. They buried Eleanor on a ledge that looked over the basin's blue. The stone took her name in a careful hand. Micah read a paragraph from a letter she had mailed east before the storm. The paper creased where she had folded it more than once. No one spoke after that. Wind moved the sage. The fall kept up its white curtain. At Haven Hollow, the yard looked smaller without threat hanging in it. Boards on the porch had split where Boots had stopped and turned. Maya and Micah ripped them up and set new planks. Evelyn stood the bottles back in the cottonwood with fresh string and clean knots. When sun passed the porch floor, the glass gave a low song that carried into the kitchen. Caleb woke that afternoon and watched Maya move through the doorway like she had always known the way a house breathes. "How long?" he said. His voice sounded like it had been in storage. "Long enough to count the bottles," she said. Not so long that the coffee forgot how to taste bitter. He smiled with half his mouth. His hand found the sheet and folded a corner back and forth. "Rio. Sleeping like he built the fence line," Maya said. "He is a heavy worker." A telegram arrived from Boston 2 days later. Sutter brought it himself and set it on the table with the gravity of a warrant. The editor had published Eleanor's series under a headline that filled a column. The copy spoke of camps where rations ran short by law and men who turned that law to profit. It named Whitlock. It named Beaumont. It named Ash Road without giving away stone or trail. It carried the plain force of a thing set down by a hand that had learned not to tremble. Sutter tipped his hat and left without staying for stew. He had other doors to knock. Summer settled like a blanket that smelled of sun. Caleb walked the yard in slow loops until his legs remembered. Maya split rails and felt the swing of the maul carry the worry out through her shoulders. Lena came down with crates of seedlings and a ledger of supplies. Micah built a tight box for the badge and the cut coin in case a flood came or a fire got loose. They married under the cottonwood near the small stone that said Sarah. Bottles hummed when the wind traced the branches. Lena tied a strip of white cloth around their joined hands while a few from Blue Basin and a few from Silver Mesa stood in a half circle. Evelyn held Rio and dabbed his chin with a corner of her shawl. Sutter came without a coat and stood at the edge like a man who worries his boots will track a floor. Maya placed Caleb's half-coin against Lena's and let them meet until the sun showed a complete circle in the seam. The sound it made was soft and neat. Caleb's fingers shook a little when he slid the band onto her hand. She did not look at the faces or the hands clapping. She watched his eyes and the way they steadied when he looked back at her. They ate outside at a table made from the old porch boards. The stew tasted of rabbit and green chile. Bread went fast. Laughter came in pieces and then held. Someone found a fiddle that had lost a string and made it sing anyway. When the light fell behind the rim, the bottles took over the music. By fall, a schoolhouse rose near the cottonwood, small and square, with windows that caught morning. Lena chalked stars on a slate and told their names in 2 languages. Children traced the lines with bare toes in the dirt outside. Caleb showed older hands how to set a fence post straight and true. Evelyn ran a line to the spring and built a wash stand so no one had to carry water so far in the hottest hour. On a clear night, Rio stood in the yard in a shirt that had been mended neatly. He reached for the sky with both hands. Maya lifted him so he could touch the cold air above her head. He said star and laughed like the word had tickled him. Caleb set his palm on the small of her back. The heat there matched hers. Judge Whitlock left town in irons with Sutter and 2 deputies. Folks watched without speaking. The courthouse door shut. Silver Mesa's air changed a degree you could feel if you were the sort who listens to wind. Micah came by with 2 sacks of flour and news that a telegraph had tapped to the Capitol and then back again with the word hearings. No one cheered. Work waited in the yard and in the basin. The news settled into people the way water settles into cracked ground. Winter brought thin ice in the bucket and a sky as hard as glass. The cottonwood held its leaves late and dropped them in one brittle sigh. Bottles chimed on still days when a hawk crossed just right. The house took on the smell of cedar coffee and bread. Caleb slept without sweating through the night. Maya woke when Rio did and went back to sleep with his breath under her hand. Spring returned as a green smudge on the far flats. The schoolhouse chalkboard filled with simple sums. The garden boxes spilled cilantro and onions. A new cabin went up beyond the barn. Folks came who had nowhere else to go and found places to sit. Some were quiet. Some told parts of their stories. No one asked for more than a person could give. On an evening that tasted of reindeer stepped to the edge of the yard and bent their heads to graze. A fawn wobbled and corrected. Rio set his palm flat on the window and watched with his mouth open. The bottles made a single low note. Water ran in the rill by the garden, clear over sand and pebbles that caught light even after the sun slipped. Maya stood with her hand on the doorframe and listened to the house settle. Caleb leaned in the doorway beside her with a piece of twine in his fingers. They did not talk. They watched the deer move out and the light take its time leaving. She felt the weight of the coin against her chest, warm from the skin beneath it. He reached across that small space and closed his hand over hers. The yard opened out into the hollow, then to the rim, then to the blue that comes after red. The bottles sang once. The sound hung and then went thin. The water kept on. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.